And just want to introduce Gavriel. If for those of you that don't know, he recently successfully landed, and I'm not going to spoil much more than that, but he is here to share with us his job search journey today and what it took to make that happen successfully for him. Gavriel, welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I wanted to start by giving a little bit of my background. So I was active duty Air Force from 2010 to 2013. And then I transitioned over to the Air National Guard, first with a unit down in Madison, and then transferred up to the Minneapolis area here about 6 or so years ago. So I've been with the Minnesota Air National Guard since then. One of the challenging things that I ran into with my job search was at times the challenges associated with being in the Air National Guard, because I had accepted a new position and a commissioning opportunity. So it was a great opportunity for me, but it also meant that there was a lot of kind of uncertainty in some of the timelines for training. And the training itself was very time consuming. And what that meant, because it was taking me out of the area, had around 2 months of officer training school, kind of the tail end of 2019, and then most of last year from May until late December, I was at Goodfellow Air Force Base down in San Angelo, Texas. So those periods of service definitely represented challenges, because I was at a civilian employer, and I had up to earlier this month, I had been there for just over 5.5 years. But I did want to transition into something different. But because those timelines from the Air National Guard side, it made it really difficult. First in 2019, when I was kind of thinking about maybe making a change, and then knowing that I had to contend with that 2-month absence then, so I didn't want to commit to anything new at that time. And then once I got back from that, end of 2019, going into the beginning of 2020, I kind of started my job search, I would say, in earnest. So beginning in early 2020, January timeframe, I had found a position that I thought was pretty interesting with a company called Donaldson, maybe Donaldson Filtration Systems, but very large filtration systems manufacturer. It was doing research and development, which was the area that I had been working in. I thought it looked like a good fit, and actually was able to kind of get into the, got noticed, got interviews, without doing any networking for that position, which was really good early luck. I, of course, didn't know at the time how long challenging my job search journey was going to be, but I would say, if nothing else, it gave me a lot of hope, I think, for making that change, because even though I didn't get that particular position, I'd gotten really far in the interview process that culminated in it was like a day-long interview. I think I had maybe like 4 different panels, and then at the end of the day, I did an hour-long presentation on some research, and it was very time-consuming. It was, I would say, challenging to have such a long interview, but nonetheless, the compensation for the position was or would have been very competitive, and it really kind of gave me that feeling that I was at least headed in the right direction, that someone was looking at me and seeing that my skill set potentially had value. Ultimately, I'm maybe lucky that I didn't get that position, because I had interviewed. That last interview was around middle of February, 2020. And of course, COVID did not happen too much later. And I think I would have potentially run that risk of getting laid off, if I had gone into a position and then, less than a month later, kind of the lockdowns happened and everything. So I wound up sticking with my current employer through that time. Beginning of May, or I should say middle of May, I got married right before heading down to Texas for this seven and a half months, give or take, of training for the Air Force. And once I got down there and kind of got established, it was around June timeframe that I really picked up again on my job search. And the thought was, I didn't know how long it was going to take. And I also didn't know how long kind of that process was going to be, even if I had found an employer that I liked, or that really liked me. Some large companies can take sometimes months in order to get through that process. And I figured, with COVID, everything was going to be distance anyway. So it was as good a time as ever to start looking again. And fortunately or unfortunately, pretty much right away in June, I found kind of the ideal position that I was looking for. And again, did not have any real networking with the company, but when I found the position, I reached out to the HR person there, and it was a relatively small company, but I reached out to her. I tried to get as much information as possible. Kind of got a little bit of feedback from her about, whether she thought I might be a good fit for the position. Ultimately applied and did a couple of interviews with them. And they really liked me as a candidate. I thought it was kind of the ideal position. It was sort of the senior level research and development role. I actually would have been leading their research and development team, so answering to the CEO of the company. Sounded like a great opportunity. The problem was they wanted to fill the role as soon as possible, and I was committed until the end of December. So, I kind of told them as much, and actually a couple of months later, they had reached back out to me because they were kind of restarting their search because they hadn't found any better candidates than me, and were curious if my timeline still lined up. So, again, it wasn't a role that wound up working out for me, but it was showing me that I was, had the potential to be, in demand. My skill set, as niche as it could be at times, for the right employer, was exactly what they were looking for. So, I kept at it. And there were a number of other companies that I interviewed with kind of over that span that I was in Texas. A couple of them, Collins Aerospace down in Burnsville. I interviewed for a sort of research and development-ish role there. But that position, while they really liked me, that position actually wound up getting cut because they had a lot of exposure to the civilian aerospace marketplace, which was not in a good position during COVID. And actually, I think a month or two after that interview, or I should say after they cut that position, the parent company, I think, wound up cutting something like 20% of their staff. So again, it was probably good that it didn't work out, but nonetheless, a little frustrating. One of the other big ones that I interviewed with was a company called Colder Products Corporation. So CPC, they're up in Roseville. They're owned by Dover, which is a kind of a large holdings company, have been for, I think, maybe 10, 15 years now. But I interviewed for one position with CPC that was kind of a good fit for my skill set, and seemed promising, but it was a new hire role, and I checked about 95% of their boxes, but they were adamant that they didn't want to train anyone. So they wanted someone that checked 100% of their boxes, and also that the compensation for what they were asking for and everything didn't quite seem right. But while it didn't work out with the hiring manager, I really liked the HR person that I was dealing with. He was technically contracted, but he was contracted through the parent company, Dover. And so, in one sense, he was a little more kind of disconnected and objective. But so I kept in touch with him. And a couple of months later, just periodically reaching out, seeing how things were, he reached out to me and said that they had a hard to fill role at CPC, and he wanted to know if he could put my name in for it. So, again, it was one of those instances where networking was, I think, really paid off, because it meant that there was someone in the organization that was, that was kind of an internal advocate for me, that had dealt with me enough to understand what my skill set was, and wanted to put me in for a position because they thought that I was the right fit for it. So it really highlights, I think, why not only networking is important, but why networking kind of with the right people in the right places is so important, and making sure that it's not just networking kind of with this explicit intent of getting a job, actually having it be personable and trying to develop, relationships, working relationships with people, because you never know when those networking opportunities may pay off down the line. So that said, I was brought in to interview for this role at CPC. I was a good fit. The hiring manager really liked me, and at the end of the day, they made me an offer. However, the offer was not quite in line with what, one, with what I expected, and two, kind of with what I thought that the market would have been expecting for a role like that. So, when I looked up sites, on sites like Onet or salary.com, and tried to do a little bit of digging about where I thought that role fit in the salary range, what they were looking for in terms of experience, it just didn't align. I didn't feel like it was really far off on the salary side, but it was far off enough. And so I counteroffered on the salary side, and on the total compensation side. They offered a signing bonus. I said, well, I don't really want the signing bonus, but I'd like a little more salary here, and if possible, I would like PTO that's kind of in line with what my current employer was offering. And this is a very non-typical experience. Just putting that right out there. 100% of the time, you absolutely want to negotiate. And in this case, negotiating did not make for a meaningful, outcome. But I would say that it also revealed things about this employer. So when I counteroffered, their response was basically something to the effect of, we think that your compensation expectations are not in line with this position. Good luck on your job search. And that was it. They just cut the communication right there. And, ultimately it was a little frustrating at the time. But I also knew that I had kind of done the right research, and that I had brought some compelling arguments to the table. And the fact that they weren't willing to discuss in any capacity told me that that they maybe were not an employer that I actually wanted to work for anyway, because like I said, they were not offering salary in line with what I saw, the market would have been expecting to pay. They were hoping to get at least a 2-year commitment out of me. I got the impression, in looking around at some of the other sources out there as well, that compensation sort of across the board. And in fact, I'm speaking with this contract HR person as well, that this company just was not in the business of paying competitive salaries. Their perspective was something to the effect of, we think we're a really great company, and that should somehow make up part of that compensation package. And there were certainly some nice fringe benefits that they offered. There were some good quality of life things. They had new facilities. There was a lot of things to like, at least at the surface, with this employer. But I was really turned off by the fact that in the interview process, they talked about kind of how valuable this particular role was. In this case, it was an applications engineer role, but they talked about how much work there was, how profitable the company had been the last year, because they were sourcing a lot of products into vaccine manufacturers. So they talked about how profitable the company was, how busy they were, how much they needed a new applications engineer, and how they thought that I was the right person for the role. But then when it came down to it, they weren't willing to offer compensation, even a few thousand more than their initial offer, which was a lot of red flags in my book. So ultimately, that of course did not wind up resulting in employment, and the search continued. So throughout the job search, I had been doing a lot of networking with medical device companies, aerospace, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, Collins Aerospace, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. The thinking was that these were kind of two different regulated industries, but that, on the whole seemed to have good quality of life, good benefits, and pretty competitive pay. So those were the two kind of areas that I was pursuing. And a couple of months ago, I did wind up interviewing for a position at Northrop Grumman. And I had some good contacts there. I got a lot of really positive reception, a lot of really positive feedback from the individuals I knew in the organization, how my background was aligning well with this particular role. I interviewed for it. It was 1-round interviews, which I really liked. So it was the hiring manager and then one of the other managers that kind of worked alongside her. And I think she liked me as an individual. I got the impression that I was a great fit for the role. They seemed personable. They seemed like great people to work for, to work with. And like I said, I also really enjoyed the fact that it was just 1-round interviews. So based on that alone, they were going to make their decisions. But after a couple of weeks, there were a total of 6 candidates, and apparently it was just sort of a toss-up between myself and one other candidate for this role. I wound up losing out on that. And it was definitely, I think, a little bit more of a hit to me, just because I thought that this role checked a lot of the right boxes. I thought that I was a great fit for it. The compensation was what I was looking for. And so again, it definitely felt like it set me back a little bit in the job search. At least from that mindset perspective of, well, maybe I'm just kind of stuck at my current role kind of forever. That prompted me to start looking a lot more at like contract employment, and to reach out to some of these companies like Aerotech and Locklead and a few other ones in the area, more aggressively to try to line up a role there. The thought being, well, if I'm not lining up these roles in aerospace or defense, maybe I just need to do something contract and get a little more experience in those areas, and then try to get a long-term opportunity out of that, or at least getting that experience so that I'm more competitive the next time around. Ultimately, those kind of didn't come to fruition, at least in the short term. But the Air National Guard, again, training, was forcing my hand again, because earlier this month, I needed to do another 3 weeks of training on base locally. And it got to be kind of tail end of June. I still hadn't found anything, but I was kind of confident through this contract process that I was likely going to be able to line something up. And because I knew that I had to do 3 weeks of training on base, kind of mid-July timeframe, I made the decision. Again, not necessarily the right decision. I don't, certainly not the right decision for everyone, and I would not suggest it for most people. But I made the decision to put in my 2 weeks notice at my current job, because I had that military training coming up. The military training was going to be 3 weeks. I knew that even if I didn't have something lined up at the tail end of that, so at the end of July, there was still some other training opportunities that I could do on base. There were some guard drill makeups that I had. And then ultimately, the other thing that was, I think, kind of a helpful piece for me as well was that I was getting my health insurance through the military still, because it was through the Air National Guard. And then additionally, I had a decent amount in savings. So it was the combination of those things that I knew that I was going to be in an okay place financially, even if I didn't line something else up right away. And so, on one hand, the military made the job search more challenging, over the last year and a half, but it also, I think, presented me that kind of peace of mind that because I still had access to health insurance, that, if nothing else, that was kind of going to allow me to bridge a gap if I ran into it. That said, I put in my 2 weeks notice at work, and the next day, completely unprompted, out of the blue, at around noon, I got a phone call from a friend of mine. His boss works for, or he and his boss both work for this company called TE Connectivity. His boss called me kind of sight unseen at around noon, so less than 24 hours after I'd put in my 2 weeks notice. And he wanted to meet up to talk about a position. Turned out that he was working remotely that day. And then his kids were enrolled in school not too far away from where I was living. So he had flexibility in his schedule. And so I got off the phone with him a little after noon. And then at 3 o'clock, he and I met up for coffee. So very tight timeline. We met up, we kind of talked about what it was that they were doing in his facility. He had seen my resume because my friend had shown it to him. He already knew kind of what my background was and where he thought that I would fit into that organization, and where it was that they thought I would be kind of the right fit. And ultimately what it came down to was they were more production focused, and because of my strong background in research and development, he thought that I could bring kind of a unique perspective to that team, and that with that research and development perspective, that I could maybe drive some new initiatives in that company, and kind of help bring them, I guess, into, in a sense, the 21st century, but better align this organization with the parent organization of TE, because the facility that they're currently working in was just purchased a few years ago, and there were some challenges that they were running into. So long story short, they saw how I could be effective in that organization, and he wanted to hire me. So so he and I spoke. He said that he would get something kind of moving. Friday of that week, he unofficially extended me the job offer, and I said that I absolutely wanted it. And then he got HR working on it. They rewrote the job description to better align with my experience and my background, so that they could justify kind of the compensation that they were looking to offer me. And then a week after that conversation that I had with him, so the next Friday, HR formally extended me the written offer, and I accepted the role with TE Connectivity as a senior R&D engineer. So, again, very similar to what happened with CPC, where it was someone internal to the company that had my resume, that knew what I brought to the table, and they were an internal advocate for me. And it again really highlighted how important networking was in that journey. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I got really lucky that those timelines kind of all aligned. But I also know that it was a very long journey. I did a lot of networking along the way, and that there were a lot of times in there that I really honestly just thought about sort of giving up on the whole job search and going back to my old job again. And I certainly, appreciate that not everyone has that that comfort to say, well, at least I'm in a job, I'm making money, that I always had that to fall back on in my job search. But at the end of the day, that also presented some challenges too, because it meant that I was to some extent comfortable. I was a little bored in my current job. I didn't really want to continue working there, but I knew that that there was still compensation, that there was still work to be done if I wanted to stay. And so I think there were maybe some slow points in the job search that if I was more motivated, I could have pushed it along faster or with a little more zeal. And so again, there's some positives and there's some negatives there. Ultimately, though, it is nice to be actively working on that job search while you still have income coming in. You're not always afforded that opportunity, but it's really helpful when it happens. So that kind of concludes the job search. Are there any questions?